Welcome to Nightshift Horror. Before we check in tonight, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now get comfortable. The night shift is about to begin.
Story 1. Final Site Clearance Log. The air tasted wrong before I even opened the door. Not toxic. I would have flagged that immediately, but occupied. Like someone had been breathing in that space recently enough to leave warmth behind. I have been an environmental safety inspector for 11 years. My work involves certifying abandoned structures as inert, confirming that a building no longer poses chemical, biological, or structural hazards to the public. It is methodical work. I measure air quality, document mold proliferation, assess structural integrity, and file reports that determine whether a property can be demolished, repurposed, or left standing under municipal observation. The process is standardized. There is comfort in standardization. The Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital had been closed for 19 years when I received the assignment. The county planned to convert the eastern wing into administrative offices. But before any contractor could begin work, the site required full environmental clearance. My job was to confirm that the building was, in every measurable sense, dead. I arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October. The hospital sat 3 miles outside the town limits, surrounded by overgrown fields and a rusted perimeter fence that had long since stopped serving any purpose. The main structure was 5 stories tall, red brick, with narrow windows that gave it the appearance of something designed to keep things in, rather than out. A separate intake building stood to the left, connected by an enclosed walkway. Behind the main structure, I could see the outlines of auxiliary buildings, storage, maintenance, what might have been a chapel. I parked near the main entrance and began my preliminary assessment. Exterior masonry showed expected weather damage. Several windows were broken. Graffiti marked the lower walls, though not as extensively as I had anticipated. Someone had chained the front doors, but the county had provided me with keys and a bypass code for the security panel, though I doubted the panel still functioned. The air quality monitor on my belt registered normal levels as I approached. Temperature 51 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity 63%, particulate count within acceptable range. Everything was as it should be. I unlocked the chain and pulled the door open. The hinges protested, but the door moved smoothly. I stepped into the main lobby and activated my flashlight. The lobby was smaller than I expected. A reception desk stood directly ahead, its surface empty except for a layer of dust. To the left, a waiting area with rows of plastic chairs, many overturned. To the right, a bulletin board still displayed faded notices about visiting hours and patient rights. The air smelled of mildew and old paint. My monitor continued reading normal. I spent the first 2 hours documenting the ground floor, administration offices, a small cafeteria, restrooms, storage closets. Mold growth was present, but not excessive. Structural damage was minimal. I photographed every room, recorded measurements, and filled out the initial sections of my report. By midday, I had cleared the ground floor and prepared to move upstairs. The second floor housed patient rooms, small, institutional, each with a narrow bed frame bolted to the floor and a single window. Most of the mattresses had been removed. I moved through the corridor methodically, checking each room, noting the presence of asbestos in the ceiling tiles, documenting water damage near the eastern stairwell. My monitor recorded everything automatically. The data would be compiled into a formatted report once I returned to my office. The third floor was similar. More patient rooms, a nurse's station, a common area with furniture too heavy to remove. I found a recreation room with a television still mounted to the wall, its screen shattered. The fourth floor contained administrative offices and what appeared to be medical archives, filing cabinets with drawers hanging open, papers scattered across the floor. I did not read the papers. That was not part of my assignment. By late afternoon, I had cleared 4 floors. The building was structurally sound. Air quality remained within acceptable limits. I prepared to move to the 5th floor, expecting it to be similar to the others. The stairwell to the 5th floor was narrower than the others. The walls were painted a different color, pale green instead of beige. My flashlight beam revealed scuff marks on the walls as though something had been dragged upward repeatedly. I noted this in my report as evidence of prior equipment removal. The 5th floor was different. The corridor was longer, extending farther than the floors below. The ceiling was lower. The doors were heavier with reinforced frames and small observation windows embedded with wire mesh. I recognized the design immediately. This had been the secure ward. I moved through the corridor, checking each room. Most were empty. A few still contained bed frames and restraint anchors embedded in the walls. The air felt heavier here, though my monitor showed no variation in pressure or composition. I attributed the sensation to psychological discomfort. Secure wards always carry a residual unease, even when empty. Halfway down the corridor, I encountered the first anomaly. One of the rooms, number 512, failed inspection. I had tested the air quality in every room prior to this one without issue. The readings were consistent. Low particulate count, normal gas composition, no volatile organic compounds. But when I entered room 512, my monitor spiked. Carbon dioxide levels elevated sharply, not to dangerous levels, but noticeably higher than the surrounding rooms. The temperature also registered 2 degrees warmer. I checked the monitor's calibration. It was functioning correctly. I stepped back into the corridor. The readings returned to normal. I re-entered the room. The readings spiked again. I documented the anomaly and moved to the next room. No elevation. The room after that, normal. I returned to 512 and tested again. The readings were identical to before. Elevated carbon dioxide, increased temperature. I expanded my testing to the surrounding rooms. 510, normal. 514, normal. 516, elevated carbon dioxide and temperature identical to 512. I continued down the corridor, testing every room. By the time I reached the end, I had identified 7 rooms with identical anomalies. They were not clustered together. They appeared at irregular intervals: 512, 516, 521, 526, 530, 534, 539. I returned to my vehicle and retrieved a secondary monitor to confirm the readings. Both devices reported identical data. The anomalies were real. I considered potential explanations. Residual heating systems, though the building had no active power. Thermal pockets caused by structural insulation, though the rooms were identical in construction. Decomposition, though there was no odor and no visible organic matter. I filed a preliminary report noting the anomalies and recommended further testing before clearance could be issued. The county responded within 2 days, requesting that I return to conduct a secondary inspection focused specifically on the 5th floor. I returned the following Monday. The weather had turned colder. Frost covered the grass outside the hospital. I entered through the same door, moved through the same corridors, and ascended to the 5th floor. The anomalies were still present. Carbon dioxide levels in the same 7 rooms remained elevated. Temperature readings were identical to my previous visit. I expanded my inspection. I tested air samples at different times of day. I left monitors running overnight and retrieved them the following morning. The data was consistent. The 7 rooms maintained elevated readings regardless of external conditions. I submitted a second report recommending environmental remediation before the building could be cleared. The county approved the recommendation and contracted a remediation team to address potential mold or pest contamination. The remediation team arrived 3 weeks later. They sealed the affected rooms, ran air scrubbers, and applied antimicrobial treatments. They found no mold, no pest activity, no structural damage that would explain the readings. After remediation, I returned for a third inspection. The anomalies were unchanged. I tested the rooms again. Carbon dioxide elevated, temperature 2 degrees above baseline. I reviewed the remediation report. Every procedure had been completed according to protocol. There was no environmental factor that should have produced these readings. I returned to my office and contacted the county directly. I explained that I could not certify the building as safe for occupancy while the anomalies persisted. I recommended sealing the 5th floor and restricting access until a more comprehensive analysis could be conducted. The county representative asked if the readings posed an immediate health risk. I confirmed they did not. The levels were elevated but not dangerous. The representative asked if the readings would prevent demolition or construction. I confirmed they would not. The representative thanked me for my diligence and informed me that the county had decided to proceed with the project. The 5th floor would remain sealed. The rest of the building would be cleared for renovation. I was instructed to finalize my report and certify the structure as compliant with environmental safety standards. I filed the report. I certified the building. My work was complete, but I kept a copy of the data. 7 rooms, elevated carbon dioxide, elevated temperature, readings consistent with continuous human respiration in a building that had been empty for 19 years. I have been an environmental safety inspector for 11 years. I measure air quality, document structural conditions, and file reports. I do not speculate. I do not interpret. I record what the instruments tell me. The instruments told me that 7 rooms on the 5th floor of Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital were still occupied. My report was filed under standard compliance. The building was certified as inert. I have not been asked to return, but sometimes late in the evening I review the data from that assignment. I look at the timestamps, the temperature curves, the gas composition readouts. I compare them to baseline readings from other abandoned structures. The pattern is unmistakable. The building is breathing, not everywhere. Just 7 rooms, 7 specific locations distributed across a single floor, maintaining conditions consistent with continuous habitation. I have submitted the data to my supervisor twice. Both times I was informed that the readings, while unusual, do not meet the threshold for reopening the inspection. The building has been cleared. The project is moving forward. I have stopped submitting the data. I have not stopped reviewing it. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I returned to the 5th floor now, after the renovations have begun. If I tested those 7 rooms again, would the readings remain unchanged? Would the air still taste occupied? I have been an environmental safety inspector for 11 years. I know the difference between a building that is abandoned and a building that is waiting. Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital is not abandoned. It is still listed as occupied. The paperwork reflects this. The instruments confirm it. And somewhere in the county records filed under routine compliance, my report certifies that everything is within acceptable limits, which technically is true. The question I no longer ask aloud is, acceptable to whom? Story 2. The intake wing still responds. I pushed open the door to the intake wing, and every call panel along the corridor lit up at once, displaying sequential numbers as though patients had been checking in all morning. I am an architectural surveyor. My work involves documenting the structural and spatial characteristics of buildings scheduled for preservation, renovation, or demolition. I measure dimensions, photograph architectural details, assess load-bearing elements, and produce technical drawings that guide construction or historical archiving. The work is precise. It requires attention to spatial relationships, material degradation, and design intent. I have surveyed over 200 buildings in the past 14 years. Most are unremarkable. Some are beautiful. A few are unsettling in ways that have nothing to do with aesthetics. Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital was commissioned for a preservation assessment. The county intended to nominate the main building for historical registry, which required comprehensive architectural documentation. My assignment was to survey the intake wing, a 2-story structure connected to the main hospital by an enclosed walkway. The wing had been added in 1964 and represented a distinct phase of institutional design. It was considered architecturally significant enough to warrant detailed documentation before any renovation began. I arrived on a cold morning in early November. The intake wing stood separate from the main building, accessible through a covered corridor or via its own front entrance. The structure was modest, 2 stories, red brick, with large windows designed to project openness and accessibility. The architectural intent was clear. This was the face the hospital showed to the public. It was meant to be welcoming. I approached the front entrance and used the access code provided by the county. The door unlocked smoothly. I stepped inside and immediately noted the layout. The ground floor consisted of a reception area, a waiting room, and several intake offices. The reception desk was positioned centrally, facing the entrance. Behind it, a corridor extended toward the main hospital. To the left, a staircase led to the 2nd floor. To the right, a series of small rooms, consultation spaces, I assumed, lined a narrow hallway. The space was brighter than I expected. Large windows allowed substantial natural light. The floors were linoleum, scuffed but intact. The walls were painted pale yellow. A bulletin board near the entrance still displayed notices, faded but legible. I began my documentation with the reception area. I measured the desk, photographed the layout, and sketched the spatial relationships between the entrance, the desk, and the waiting area. Standard procedure. As I worked, I noticed the call panels. There were 3 mounted on the wall behind the reception desk, small electronic displays, each showing a 2-digit number. I recognized the design. They were patient tracking systems common in hospitals during the 1970s and 80s. Patients checking in would be assigned a number, and the panels would display the sequence, indicating who was being processed and who was waiting. The panels were dark. No power ran to the building. I noted their presence in my documentation and continued working. I spent 2 hours surveying the ground floor. I documented the waiting area, rows of chairs bolted to the floor, a low table with scattered magazines. I measured the intake offices, small rooms with desks, filing cabinets, and narrow windows. I photographed the corridor leading to the main hospital, noting the architectural transition between the intake wing and the older structure. By midday, I had completed the ground floor. I returned to the reception area to review my notes before moving upstairs. As I approached the reception desk, the call panels activated. All 3 displays lit up simultaneously. The first showed 01, the second showed 02, the third showed 03. I stopped walking. The panels remained lit. The numbers did not change. I checked the walls for electrical connections. There were none. The building had no active power. I checked the panels themselves, looking for battery compartments. There were none visible. I stepped back from the desk. The panels remained lit for another 10 seconds, then went dark. I attributed the activation to residual capacitance. Old electronics sometimes hold a charge long after power is removed. It was unusual, but not impossible. I noted the incident in my documentation and moved toward the staircase. As I passed the reception desk, the panels activated again. This time, the displays showed 040506. I stopped. The numbers were sequential. They had incremented since the previous activation. I stood motionless for 30 seconds. The panels remained lit. Then they went dark. I returned to the desk and examined the panels more closely. They were mounted flush to the wall with no visible wiring. The model number was stamped on the casing, a Demco patient tracking system model PTS 347. I photographed the panels and made a note to research the model when I returned to my office. I proceeded to the second floor. The layout mirrored the ground floor, a central corridor with rooms on either side. Most were offices, small, institutional with desks and chairs. A few were storage rooms still filled with filing cabinets. I measured each space, photographed architectural details, and documented the condition of the materials. The work was routine until I reached the end of the corridor. The final room was larger than the others. It appeared to have been a conference or training space. A long table occupied the center of the room. Chairs were pushed against the walls. At the far end of the room, another call panel was mounted. This one was larger, 6 displays arranged in 2 rows of 3. It was dark like the others. I entered the room and began measuring. I photographed the space from multiple angles, documented the furniture placement, and sketched the layout. As I worked, the panel activated. All 6 displays lit up simultaneously. The numbers were not sequential this time. They showed 07, 012, 018, 023, 029, 034. I lowered my camera and stared at the panel. The numbers remained stable for 15 seconds. Then the displays began cycling. 07 changed to 08, 012 changed to 013. The other numbers incremented in the same manner, each advancing by 1 digit, then holding steady. I approached the panel. As I did, the numbers stopped cycling. The displays showed 08, 013, 019, 024, 030, 035. I stepped back. The numbers held for another 10 seconds, then went dark. I left the room and returned to the ground floor. The reception desk panels were lit again. They showed 036, 037, 038. I walked toward the desk. The numbers incremented. 039, 040, 041. I stopped walking. The numbers held steady. I took 3 steps back. The panels went dark. I conducted an experiment. I walked past the desk without stopping. The panels activated, displaying 3 sequential numbers. I continued walking toward the exit. The panels went dark. I turned and walked toward the desk again. The panels activated. The numbers were new, 3 digits higher than before. I repeated this process 4 times. Each time the panels activated as I approached. Each time the numbers were sequential and incremented from the previous set. I documented the pattern carefully. I filmed the panels activating. I recorded the numbers. I measured the distance at which the activation occurred, approximately 8 feet from the desk. I returned to the second floor and tested the conference room panel. The result was identical. As I approached, the panel activated. The numbers incremented from where they had left off. I spent the rest of the afternoon testing every panel I could find. There were 11 total, 3 in the reception area, 6 in the conference room, and 2 in hallways I had not initially surveyed. Every panel responded the same way. Activation upon approach, sequential numbering, incremental progression. I submitted my initial survey report that evening, including detailed documentation of the panel behavior. I described it as an electrical anomaly requiring further investigation. The County Historical Preservation Office responded the next day. They asked if the anomaly affected the structural integrity or historical character of the building. I confirmed it did not. They instructed me to complete the survey and include the panels in my architectural documentation as period-appropriate features. I returned the following week to complete the second-floor survey. I measured the remaining rooms, photographed the stairwell, and documented the enclosed corridor connecting the intake wing to the main hospital. The panels continued activating every time I passed them. By the end of my second visit, the reception desk panels displayed numbers in the low hundreds. The conference room panels displayed numbers in the 200s. I finished the survey and submitted my final report. I included scaled drawings, material assessments, and photographic documentation. I noted the call panels as functioning historical artifacts, though I could not identify a power source. The report was accepted. The intake wing was approved for historical registry. I was not asked to return, but I kept the footage. I have watched it dozens of times, the panels activating in sequence, the numbers advancing as I move through the space. The displays going dark when I leave. I researched the Ademco PTS 347. The system was designed to operate on dedicated low-voltage wiring, integrated into the building's electrical infrastructure. It required constant power. Without power, the displays would not function. There was no backup battery. No capacitor capable of holding a charge for 19 years. The panels should not have activated, but they did, and they responded to proximity. I have considered explanations: residual charge, electromagnetic interference, sensor malfunction. None of them account for the sequential numbering. None of them explain why the numbers incremented consistently as though tracking individual encounters. I was surveying an empty building. The panels were counting patients, and the count included me. Story 3. Archived under active treatment. The file was labeled with my handwriting, but I had never seen it before. It was dated 3 months in the future and listed me as the attending physician for a patient who had been dead for 15 years. I am a medical records archivist. My work involves organizing, digitizing, and preserving patient documentation for long-term storage and regulatory compliance. I manage the transition of physical records into secure digital formats, ensuring that information remains accessible, accurate, and legally compliant. The work is meticulous. It requires attention to detail, adherence to privacy regulations, and a systematic approach to classification. I have been doing this for 9 years. Most of the records I handle are routine: discharge summaries, treatment logs, consent forms. Occasionally, I encounter records that are incomplete, damaged, or improperly filed. These require additional research and documentation before they can be archived. It is rare but not unusual. Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital's medical records were scheduled for digitization as part of the county's historical preservation initiative. The hospital had closed 19 years prior, but its records had been stored on site in the Medical Archives building, a separate single-story structure behind the main hospital. The county contracted my firm to retrieve, organize, and digitize approximately 40,000 patient files spanning 6 decades. My role was to oversee the project, manage the cataloging process, and ensure compliance with healthcare privacy regulations. I arrived at the archive building on a Monday in mid-November. The structure was small, built in the 1970s with narrow windows and a flat roof. The interior consisted of a central workspace surrounded by rows of industrial shelving, each holding dozens of filing cabinets. The air smelled of paper and mildew. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, though most had burned out. I set up a workstation near the entrance and began the initial assessment. The records were organized chronologically by admission date, then alphabetically by patient surname. Most files were intact, though some showed signs of water damage or insect activity. I began by pulling random samples from different decades to assess the overall condition and estimate the scope of the project. The files were standard institutional documentation: admission forms, treatment plans, medication logs, psychological evaluations, discharge summaries. Some were handwritten, others typed. A few included photographs, though these were rare. I cataloged the sample files, photographed representative pages, and prepared a preliminary report for the county. The project officially began the following week. I hired 2 assistants to help with the physical handling of the files. We established a workflow: retrieve files by section, photograph each page, upload images to a secure server, verify data integrity, then return the physical files to storage. The process was slow but efficient. We worked through the 1940s and 50s without incident. The records from that period were sparse. Many patients had been admitted under minimal documentation, often with only a single intake form and a handwritten note from the admitting physician. By the time we reached the 1960s, the documentation had become more comprehensive. Files included detailed treatment histories, therapy session notes, and extensive medication records. It was in the 1970s section that I encountered the first irregularity. I pulled a file for a patient named Howard Pittman, admitted in 1973 for acute paranoid ideation. The file was thicker than most, indicating a long-term admission. I opened it and began photographing the pages. The intake form was standard: date of admission, March 14, 1973. Admitting physician, Dr. Raymond Cleff. Initial diagnosis: paranoid schizophrenia with auditory hallucinations. The treatment plan included medication and weekly therapy sessions. I continued through the file: medication logs, therapy notes, progress reports. The documentation was thorough and consistent until I reached the final page. The last entry in the file was dated November 9, 2004, 12 years after the hospital had closed. It was a discharge summary. It listed the discharging physician as Dr. Evelyn Cross. It noted that the patient had been stabilized and was being transferred to outpatient care. The signature at the bottom was illegible, but the timestamp was clear: 3:47 p.m. November 9, 2004. I set the file aside and made a note to review it more carefully later. Post-closure documentation was unusual but not impossible. Some patients had been transferred to other facilities, and their records might have been updated retroactively by receiving institutions. I continued working. Over the next 2 weeks, I encountered 4 more files with similar irregularities. Each contained entries dated years after the hospital's closure. Each listed physicians who had not been employed at the hospital during its final years. Each included discharge summaries or treatment updates that should not have existed. I compiled a list of the irregular files and submitted a query to the county. I asked if there had been any record-keeping activity after the hospital's closure: transfers, legal reviews, insurance audits, that might explain the late entries. The county responded 3 days later. They confirmed that no official activity had occurred after closure. All patient transfers had been completed by December 1992. No record should exist beyond that date. I returned to the irregular files and examined them more closely. The handwriting in the post-closure entries was consistent across all 5 files. It did not match the handwriting of the physicians listed as authors. The signatures were illegible in every case. The timestamps were precise, down to the minute, but the format did not match the timestamp conventions used by the hospital during its operational period. I documented the irregularities and flagged the files for further review. I continued with the digitization project, working through the 1980s and early 90s. The irregular files became more frequent. By the time we reached the 1990s section, approximately 1 in every 20 files contained post-closure entries. The dates ranged from 1993 to 2006. Some included single-line notes. Others included full treatment updates, spanning multiple pages. I expanded my documentation. I cataloged every irregular file, photographed the post-closure entries, and cross-referenced the listed physicians. None of the names matched staff employed during the hospital's operational period. Several names did not appear in any other documentation. I submitted a second query to the county, this time requesting access to personnel records to verify the identities of the listed physicians. The county responded that personnel records had been destroyed in accordance with standard retention policies. No verification was possible. I continued working. In early December, I encountered a file that stopped me completely. The patient's name was Margaret Albright. Admission date, June 6, 1987. The file was extensive, over 200 pages, spanning 5 years of treatment. I began photographing the file, intake forms, treatment plans, therapy session notes. Everything was consistent with standard documentation. Until I reached page 143. The entry was dated February 11, 2008, 16 years after the hospital had closed. It was a progress report. It listed the attending physician as Dr. L. Kiernan. That is my name. I am not a physician. I have never worked in a clinical capacity. I have never treated patients. I am an archivist. I read the entry 3 times. It described a therapy session conducted on February 10, 2008. It noted that the patient had shown improvement in managing auditory hallucinations. It recommended continued medication and weekly sessions. It was signed, Dr. L. Kiernan, attending physician, Ward C. The handwriting was mine. I set the file down and stepped away from the workstation. I checked the date. It was December 4, 2011. The entry in the file was dated 3 years prior. I did not work at Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital in 2008. I did not meet the patient named Margaret Albright. I did not write the entry. But the handwriting was unmistakably mine. I documented the file and flagged it as a critical irregularity. I informed my assistants that I would be conducting a comprehensive audit of all remaining files before proceeding with digitization. The audit took 3 days. I reviewed every file in the archive. I checked every entry dated after the hospital's closure. 37 files contained entries attributed to Dr. L. Kiernan. The entries spanned dates from 2006 to 2014, 8 years, including 3 years in the future from my current position in 2011. Every entry was written in my handwriting. Every entry described patient interactions I had never conducted. Every entry was signed with my name. I submitted a formal report to the county, including photocopies of the entries and a request for immediate investigation. The county responded 2 weeks later. They acknowledged the irregularities and requested that I complete the digitization project. They stated that the irregular entries would be flagged in the digital archive as unverified documentation and would not be included in any legal or historical analysis. I was instructed to proceed with the project as planned. I completed the digitization in mid-January. I archived the irregular files separately, maintaining detailed records of their content and chronology. I submitted my final report and closed the project. I have not returned to the archive building, but I kept copies of the entries attributed to me. I have read them repeatedly. The handwriting is mine. The phrasing is consistent with my professional vocabulary. The timestamps are precise. The entries describe patients I have never met. They document sessions I have never conducted. They are dated years before I began working as an archivist and years into the future from when I discovered them. I have considered explanations, forgery, administrative error, Psychological breakdown. None of them account for the consistency of the handwriting. None of them explain why my name appears in files I had never accessed prior to the digitization project. I have reviewed my own records. I have confirmed my employment history, my credentials, my daily logs. I was not at Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital during any of the dates listed in the entries, but the files say otherwise. They document my presence, my actions, my clinical judgments, and some of the entries are still ahead of me. There are 3 files with entries dated 2012, 2013, and 2014. I am writing this in late 2011. The entries describe sessions that have not yet occurred, with patients who have been dead for decades. I do not know what will happen when those dates arrive. I do not know if I will find myself writing entries I do not remember. I do not know if the archive is documenting the past or prescribing the future. But I know that somewhere in the medical archives of Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital, there are files that list me as the attending physician. And the files are still being updated, even now. Even though the hospital has been closed for 19 years, the paperwork continues, and my name is part of it. Story 4. Noise Complaint Sublevel 3. The maintenance logs listed no equipment below ground level, but the sound recorder captured rhythmic mechanical pulses identical to a ventilator's breath cycle. 17 breaths per minute uninterrupted for 6 hours. I am a municipal building code officer. My work involves investigating complaints related to building safety, noise ordinances, and structural compliance. I respond to reports from residents, assess the validity of complaints, and determine whether violations exist that require corrective action. The work is straightforward. Most complaints involve minor infractions, improperly installed ventilation, noise from commercial HVAC systems, illegal renovations. Occasionally, I encounter situations that require more extensive investigation. These are rare, but they occur. In mid-December, the municipal office received a complaint from residents living near Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital. The complaint described rhythmic mechanical sounds occurring nightly between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. The sounds were described as repetitive, low frequency, and consistent, similar to industrial machinery or ventilation systems. 3 separate households filed reports. All described the same phenomenon. I was assigned to investigate. I reviewed the property records before visiting the site. Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital had been closed since 1992. No active mechanical systems remained. Power had been disconnected in 1993. The building was unoccupied and slated for partial renovation. The county had certified the structure as environmentally inert earlier that year. I scheduled a site visit for a Thursday evening. I intended to arrive before the reported time frame and document any audible noise. I arrived at the hospital at 10:15 p.m. The night was cold and clear. I parked near the main entrance and activated my sound level meter. Background noise registered at 32 decibels, consistent with a rural environment at night. No mechanical sounds were audible. I walked the perimeter of the building, pausing every 30 feet to record sound levels. The readings remained consistent. By 11 p.m., I had completed a full perimeter sweep. No anomalous noise had been detected. I returned to my vehicle and waited. At 11:17 p.m., the sound began. It was faint at first, a low rhythmic pulse barely perceptible above the ambient noise. I stepped out of my vehicle and activated my directional microphone. The sound was coming from the building. I approached the main entrance and aimed the microphone toward the structure. The sound became clearer. It was rhythmic, mechanical, and consistent, a steady pulse occurring approximately 17 times per minute. I recorded the sound for 10 minutes. The pattern did not vary. The frequency remained stable. The volume was low but measurable, approximately 45 decibels at a distance of 20 feet from the building. I circled the building again, recording sound levels at multiple points. The noise was loudest near the eastern wing. I approached the exterior wall and placed my hand against the brick. I could feel faint vibrations, subtle, rhythmic, synchronized with the audible pulses. I documented the findings and prepared to enter the building. The county had provided me with access credentials, though I had not anticipated needing them. I unlocked the main entrance and stepped inside. The sound was louder here, approximately 55 decibels. It echoed through the empty corridors, making it difficult to pinpoint the source. I moved through the ground floor, recording sound levels in each area. The noise was present throughout the building, but it was loudest near the eastern stairwell. I descended to the basement. The basement level consisted of storage rooms, maintenance areas, and mechanical spaces. Most of the rooms were empty. A few still contained obsolete equipment, boilers, water heaters, electrical panels. None of it was operational. The sound was louder here, 62 decibels. It reverberated off the concrete walls, creating a disorienting acoustic environment. I moved through the corridors, checking each room. At the far end of the basement, I found a locked door. The sign read, "Sublevel access, authorized personnel only." I tested the door. It was locked with a deadbolt and a keycard reader. The reader's LED was dark, no power. I checked my access credentials. The county had not provided keys for sub-level areas. I returned to the ground floor and contacted the county facilities office. I explained the situation and requested access to the sub-level. The representative informed me that Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital had no sub-level. The building's blueprints showed only a single basement level. I returned to the basement and re-examined the door. The sign was original, faded, institutional, consistent with the building's design. The lock was commercial grade, installed decades ago. The door frame showed no signs of recent modification. I placed my hand against the door. The vibrations were stronger here, rhythmic, mechanical, unmistakable. I documented the findings and submitted a preliminary report. I noted the presence of a locked sub-level access door and requested architectural verification. The county responded the following day. They confirmed that the original building plans did not include a sub-level. They suggested that the door might lead to a utility crawl space or an abandoned maintenance tunnel. I returned to the site the following evening. This time, I brought bolt cutters. I cut through the deadbolt at 11:30 p.m. The sound was already present, rhythmic, steady, emanating from beyond the door. I pushed the door open and descended a narrow staircase. The sub-level was smaller than the basement. The ceiling was low, barely 7 feet. The corridor was lined with pipes and electrical conduits, most of which appeared inactive. The air was colder here. My breath condensed in the flashlight beam. The sound was louder, 73 decibels. It filled the space, resonating off the concrete walls and floor. I followed the corridor to its end, where it opened into a wider room. The room was rectangular, approximately 20 feet by 30 feet. The walls were lined with metal panels. In the center of the room stood a large machine. It was not a boiler. It was not a generator. It was something else. The machine was approximately 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide. It was encased in brushed steel with multiple gauges and dials on the front panel. Hoses extended from the top and disappeared into the ceiling. The machine was running. I approached cautiously. The gauges showed pressure readings, temperature levels, and flow rates. All were stable. A small digital display showed a number, 17. The machine emitted the rhythmic sound I had been tracking. A low pulse repeating at regular intervals, 17 times per minute. I examined the machine more closely. There was no manufacturer's label, no serial number. No indication of its purpose or origin. I checked the hoses. They extended into the ceiling, disappearing into a shaft that led upward. I traced the shaft as far as I could with my flashlight. It appeared to connect to the floors above. I recorded video of the machine. I documented the gauges, the hoses, the digital display. I measured the sound levels, 81 decibels at a distance of 3 feet. I attempted to power down the machine. There was no visible switch, no control panel, no emergency shutoff. The machine continued running. I left the sublevel and contacted the county facilities office immediately. I described the machine and requested immediate technical consultation. The county dispatched an engineer the following morning. We descended to the sublevel together. The engineer examined the machine, reviewed the gauges, and traced the hoses into the ceiling. He informed me that the machine was a medical ventilator. It was an industrial-grade model designed to supply pressurized air to multiple locations simultaneously. The hoses distributed air through a network of ducts, likely connecting to patient rooms on the floors above. The engineer checked the machine's power supply. It was hardwired into the building's electrical system, a system that had been deactivated 19 years ago. The machine should not have been running. The engineer attempted to shut it down manually. He disconnected the power supply. The machine continued running. He cut the hoses. The machine continued running. He removed the front panel and attempted to disable the internal mechanisms. The machine continued running. The engineer informed me that he could not explain how the machine was operational. He recommended sealing the sublevel and filing a report with the State Utility Commission. I sealed the sublevel door with a padlock and submitted a detailed report to the county. I included video documentation, sound recordings, and the engineer's assessment. The county responded 2 weeks later. They acknowledged the findings and stated that the machine posed no immediate safety risk. They recommended leaving it operational and restricting access to the sublevel. The noise complaints stopped. The residents near the hospital reported that the sounds had ceased. I returned to the site multiple times over the following month. The machine was still running. The sound was still present, but it was no longer audible outside the building. I filed my final report and closed the case. The sublevel door remains locked. The machine remains operational. I have reviewed the video footage repeatedly. The gauges, the hoses, the digital display showing 17 pulses per minute. The breathing rate of a human under sedation. The machine is ventilating something. It has been doing so for 19 years, without power, without maintenance, and according to the county, the sublevel does not exist. Story 5. Pharmacy inventory, 0 discrepancy. Every morning, the dispensing log listed new entries, prescriptions filled, medications counted, signatures recorded. But the controlled substance vault had been empty since 1992. I am a pharmaceutical compliance auditor. My work involves verifying that healthcare facilities maintain accurate records of controlled substances, ensuring compliance with federal and state regulations. I conduct routine audits, reconcile inventory discrepancies, and investigate irregularities in medication handling. The work requires meticulous attention to documentation, a thorough understanding of regulatory frameworks, and the ability to identify patterns that suggest procedural failures or intentional misconduct. I have been conducting audits for 13 years. Most facilities maintain adequate compliance. Discrepancies, when they occur, are usually minor. Documentation errors, miscounted inventory, delayed reporting. Significant violations are rare. Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital had been closed for 19 years when I received the audit assignment. The State Pharmacy Board had flagged the facility during a routine review of historical records. The board's database showed that the hospital's controlled substance inventory remained active. Prescriptions were being logged, medications were being dispensed, and inventory balances were being updated. This was inconsistent with the facility's closure. The pharmacy board requested a comprehensive audit to determine whether records were being updated erroneously or whether there was ongoing unauthorized access to the facility's pharmaceutical stores. I arrived at the hospital on a Monday morning in early January. The pharmacy was located on the ground floor of the main building, adjacent to the administrative wing. The county had provided access codes and assured me that the pharmacy had been secured since closure. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The pharmacy was small, a single room with floor-to-ceiling shelving, a dispensing counter, and a locked vault for controlled substances. The shelves were mostly empty. A few bottles of expired over-the-counter medications remained covered in dust. The dispensing counter was bare except for a logbook and a manual pill counter. I approached the vault. It was a steel cabinet approximately 6 feet tall, secured with a combination lock and a keycard reader. The keycard reader was inactive, no power. I used the combination provided by the county and opened the vault. It was empty. I documented the vault's condition and turned my attention to the logbook. The logbook was a standard pharmaceutical dispensing record, a bound ledger with entries listing medication name, dosage, quantity, prescribing physician, recipient, and date. I opened the logbook to the final entry. The date was January 6th, 2012, 4 days ago. I flipped back through the pages. The entries were continuous, spanning from 1983 to the present. There were no gaps. The handwriting varied, consistent with multiple pharmacists over the years, but the format was identical. I focused on the entries dated after the hospital's closure in 1992. The first post-closure entry was dated January 3rd, 1993. It listed a prescription for lorazepam, 2 milligrams, quantity 30, prescribed by Dr. Raymond Cleff, dispensed to patient Howard Pittman. I cross-referenced the entry with the vault inventory. According to the log, 30 tablets of lorazepam had been removed from the vault on that date. But the vault had been empty since closure. I continued reviewing the post-closure entries. They occurred daily. Each entry listed a medication, dosage, quantity, prescribing physician, and recipient. Each entry documented a dispensing event. Each entry recorded a corresponding inventory adjustment. The entries continued for 19 years. I calculated the total quantity of medications dispensed according to the log. Over 10,000 prescriptions had been filled since the hospital's closure. The inventory adjustments were precise. The log showed 0 discrepancies, but the vault was empty. I documented the findings and expanded my investigation. I checked the pharmacy's supply records, ordering history and receiving logs. All records ended in December 1992. No medications had been ordered or received after closure. I reviewed the prescribing physician records. Many of the names listed in the post-closure entries did not appear in the hospital's personnel files. I cross-referenced the names with state medical licensing databases. Several names matched active physicians, none of whom had worked at Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital. I submitted a preliminary report to the pharmacy board. I described the logbook entries, the empty vault, and the discrepancies in prescribing physician records. I recommended a forensic audit of the pharmacy's documentation and an investigation into potential unauthorized access. The pharmacy board responded within 48 hours. They requested that I remain on site and conduct a real-time monitoring audit. I was instructed to document any new entries in the dispensing log and report them immediately. I returned to the pharmacy the following morning. I positioned myself at the dispensing counter and opened the logbook to the current page. The last entry was dated January 9th, 2012, the previous day. I waited. At 11:43 a.m., a new entry appeared in the logbook. I did not see it being written. I looked away from the logbook to check my notes, and when I looked back, the entry was present. The entry listed a prescription for haloperidol, 5 milligrams, quantity 60, prescribed by Dr. Evelyn Cross, dispensed to patient Margaret Albright. The handwriting was clear and legible. The ink was fresh. I checked the vault. It was still empty. I photographed the entry and documented the time. I remained at the dispensing counter watching the logbook continuously. At 2:18 p.m., another entry appeared. This time I was staring directly at the page when it happened. The entry materialized line by line as though being written by an invisible hand. The handwriting was smooth and deliberate. The ink appeared in real time, forming letters, words, numbers. The process took approximately 30 seconds. The entry listed a prescription for clozapine, 100 milligrams, quantity 90, prescribed by Dr. L. Kiernan, dispensed to patient Samuel Roth. I set down my pen and stepped back from the counter. I checked the vault again. Still empty. I photographed the new entry and submitted an emergency report to the pharmacy board. The board dispatched an investigator the following day. We reviewed the logbook together. We documented the entries. We examined the vault, the shelving, and the dispensing counter. We found no evidence of tampering. No hidden compartments, no unauthorized access. The investigator requested that I continue monitoring the logbook for 1 additional week. I remained on site for 7 days. During that time, 43 new entries appeared in the logbook. Each entry documented a prescription. Each entry listed a medication, dosage, quantity, prescribing physician, and recipient. Each entry was written in clear, legible handwriting. I witnessed 12 entries materialize in real time. I photographed each one. On the final day of the audit, I reviewed the complete logbook. I calculated the total inventory adjustments recorded since the hospital's closure. According to the log, over 15,000 prescriptions had been dispensed. The inventory balance showed 0 discrepancies. The vault remained empty. I submitted my final report to the pharmacy board. I included photographic documentation, video recordings, and detailed descriptions of the entries. I concluded that the dispensing log was being updated by an unknown process that did not correspond to actual pharmaceutical activity. The pharmacy board reviewed the report and issued a formal finding. The logbook entries were classified as administrative artifacts and did not represent actual controlled substance dispensing. The facility's controlled substance registration was formally terminated. The case was closed. But I kept copies of the logbook entries. I have reviewed them repeatedly. The entries are precise. The handwriting is consistent. The inventory adjustments are accurate. The entries describe prescriptions that were never filled. They document medications that were never dispensed. They list physicians who were never employed at the facility. And they include my name. 3 entries list Dr. L. Kiernan as the prescribing physician. I am not a physician. I am an auditor. But the logbook says otherwise, and the entries are still appearing. I contacted the county facilities office 2 weeks ago. I requested access to the pharmacy to verify the current status of the logbook. The county informed me that the pharmacy had been sealed and access was no longer permitted. I do not know if the logbook is still being updated. I do not know if new entries are appearing. But I know that for 19 years, the dispensing log at Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital documented prescriptions that were never filled, dispensed medications that never existed, and maintained an inventory balance with 0 discrepancies. The vault was empty. The records were perfect, and somewhere in that logbook my name is listed as a prescribing physician, even though I have never prescribed medication. even though I have never treated a patient. The paperwork does not care. It records what it needs to record, and it never stops. Story 6. Ward C temperature variance. The thermal imaging camera showed 17 distinct heat signatures arranged in bed formation, each maintaining 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, in a wing that had been without climate control for 2 decades. I am an HVAC systems engineer. My work involves designing, installing, and troubleshooting heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems for commercial and institutional buildings. I assess thermal efficiency, diagnose mechanical failures, and ensure that environmental control systems operate within specified parameters. The work is technical and methodical. I rely on precise measurements, diagnostic equipment, and a thorough understanding of thermodynamic principles. I have been working in this field for 16 years. Most assignments are routine: system upgrades, efficiency audits, emergency repairs. Occasionally, I encounter thermal anomalies that require more extensive investigation. These are typically caused by insulation failures, ductwork leaks, or equipment malfunctions. The causes are always identifiable. Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital was flagged for a thermal assessment in late January. The county's environmental monitoring system had detected unusual heat signatures in one section of the building, Ward C, located on the 3rd floor of the eastern wing. The readings were inconsistent with an unheated structure. The county requested a comprehensive HVAC assessment to determine if residual heating systems were active or if there was a structural issue causing heat retention. I arrived on site on a cold afternoon. The outdoor temperature was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. I entered through the main entrance and made my way to the 3rd floor. Ward C consisted of a long corridor with patient rooms on both sides. Each room was small, approximately 10 feet by 12 feet, with a single window, a bed frame, and a narrow closet. The doors were open. The rooms were empty. I activated my infrared thermometer and began recording baseline temperatures. The corridor registered 31 degrees Fahrenheit, consistent with an unheated building in winter. I moved to the first patient room and measured the temperature. 68 degrees Fahrenheit. I recalibrated the thermometer and measured again. The reading was identical. I moved to the next room. 68 degrees. I proceeded down the corridor, measuring each room. 17 rooms registered temperatures between 67 and 69 degrees Fahrenheit. The remaining rooms, those at the ends of the corridor, registered 30 to 32 degrees, consistent with the ambient temperature. I documented the findings and expanded my investigation. I checked for active heating systems. There were none. I inspected the walls for radiant heating elements. There were none. I examined the windows for solar heat gain. The windows faced north, minimal sunlight exposure. I returned to the corridor and conducted a more detailed thermal survey using a handheld thermal imaging camera. The camera revealed distinct heat patterns within the 17 rooms. The heat was not evenly distributed. It was concentrated in specific areas, primarily near the bed frames. The thermal signatures were consistent with radiant heat sources, but no sources were visible. I entered one of the warm rooms and conducted a close-range scan. The thermal camera showed a well-defined heat signature centered on the bed frame. The shape was approximately 6 feet long and 2 feet wide. The temperature was 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. I stepped back and scanned the room again. The heat signature remained stable. It did not dissipate. It did not shift. I moved to the next room and conducted the same scan. The result was identical. A body-shaped heat signature, 98.6 degrees, centered on the bed frame. I scanned all 17 warm rooms. Every room showed the same pattern. 17 distinct heat signatures, each approximately 6 feet long, each maintaining a temperature consistent with human body heat. I documented the findings and submitted a preliminary report to the county. I described the thermal anomalies and recommended further investigation to identify the heat source. The county responded within 24 hours. They requested that I return to the site and conduct an extended monitoring session to determine if the heat signatures were stable or transient. I returned the following day with additional equipment, a multi-point temperature logger, a thermal imaging camera with recording capability, and an ambient air quality monitor. I set up the equipment in the corridor outside Ward C and initiated a 12-hour monitoring session. The loggers were placed in 3 of the warm rooms and 3 of the cold rooms for comparison. I remained on site for the duration of the monitoring session. The temperature in the warm rooms remained stable. The loggers recorded consistent readings between 67 and 69 degrees Fahrenheit. The thermal imaging camera recorded continuous video of one room. The heat signature remained visible throughout the session. It did not move. It did not fluctuate. At approximately 8 p.m., I entered the room being monitored. I approached the bed frame and held my hand above the area where the thermal camera showed the heat signature. I felt warmth. It was faint but perceptible, similar to the radiant heat from a human body. I moved my hand along the length of the bed frame. The warmth was consistent with the shape and position of the thermal signature. I returned to the corridor and reviewed the thermal imaging footage. The heat signature had not changed during my presence in the room. I completed the monitoring session and retrieved the data loggers. The temperature readings were consistent with the initial assessment. The warm rooms maintained elevated temperatures regardless of external conditions. I submitted a detailed report to the county. I included thermal imaging footage, temperature logs, and a technical analysis of potential heat sources. I concluded that the thermal anomalies could not be explained by conventional heating systems, structural insulation, or environmental factors. The county forwarded my report to a consulting engineering firm for independent review. The consulting firm dispatched 2 engineers to conduct a secondary assessment. They arrived 3 days later. We toured Ward C together. They reviewed my data. They conducted their own thermal scans. Their findings matched mine. 17 rooms, 17 heat signatures, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. No identifiable heat source. The lead consulting engineer suggested that the heat signatures might be caused by residual thermal mass, materials within the structure retaining heat from a previous source. I explained that thermal mass dissipates within hours, not decades. The hospital had been without climate control for 19 years. The consulting engineer had no alternative explanation. We submitted a joint report to the county. We recommended sealing Ward C and restricting access until a comprehensive structural and mechanical analysis could be conducted. The county accepted the recommendation. Ward C was sealed with biohazard tape and marked as restricted. I was not asked to return, but I kept the thermal imaging footage. I have reviewed it repeatedly. The heat signatures are unmistakable. They are stable, well-defined, and consistent with human body heat. They occupy the exact positions where patients would have been lying in their beds. I have researched thermal anomalies in abandoned buildings. I have consulted with colleagues. I have reviewed technical literature on heat retention, radiant energy, and structural thermodynamics. No conventional explanation accounts for the observations. The heat signatures should not exist, but they do. And they have been present for at least 19 years. I contacted the county facilities office 2 weeks ago. I requested access to historical records for Ward C, specifically patient occupancy data and room assignments. The county provided a partial record. Ward C had been used as a long-term care ward for patients with chronic psychiatric conditions. The ward had 17 beds. It was closed in November 1992 when the hospital ceased operations. The final occupancy record listed 17 patients. None were transferred to other facilities. The record listed all 17 as discharged to family care. There are no family contact records. There are no discharge summaries. There are no follow-up reports. The patients were simply removed from the record. But the heat signatures remain. 17 heat signatures, 17 beds, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature of the human body. I have been an HVAC systems engineer for 16 years. I have diagnosed failures, repaired systems, and assessed thermal efficiency in hundreds of buildings. I have never encountered heat signatures that maintain themselves without a source. I have never seen radiant heat that conforms to the shape of a human body. I have never measured temperatures that remain stable for 19 years in an unheated building. But Ward C is different. Ward C is still occupied, not by people, by heat, by the thermal memory of bodies that were never properly discharged, and engineering cannot fix that. Story 7, Emergency Lighting Test. I activated the emergency lighting system to verify functionality, and every exit sign illuminated a path that led deeper into the building, away from every actual exit. I am an electrical safety technician. My work involves testing, maintaining, and certifying emergency lighting systems in commercial and institutional buildings. I ensure that backup lighting activates during power failures, exit signs are properly illuminated, and evacuation routes are clearly marked. The work is governed by strict safety codes. I conduct routine inspections, document system performance, and verify compliance with federal and state regulations. I have been doing this for 10 years. Most systems operate as designed. Failures, when they occur, are usually due to dead batteries, faulty wiring, or improper installation. The corrections are straightforward. Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital was scheduled for an emergency lighting inspection in early February. The county's renovation plan required certification that all emergency systems were functional or safely decommissioned. My assignment was to test the emergency lighting throughout the building and verify that the system met code requirements for historical preservation. I arrived on site on a Tuesday morning. The weather was overcast and cold. I entered through the main entrance and began a preliminary assessment. The building's emergency lighting system consisted of battery-powered fixtures mounted above doorways, exit signs positioned at corridor intersections, and backup lights in stairwells. The system was designed to activate automatically during power loss, providing illumination for safe evacuation. I began testing on the ground floor. I located the main electrical panel and identified the emergency lighting circuit. The circuit breaker was in the off position, consistent with the building's decommissioned status. I activated the circuit breaker. Nothing happened. The emergency lights did not illuminate. The exit signs remained dark. I tested the individual fixtures manually. I pressed the test button on each unit. Most did not respond. A few flickered briefly, then went dark. I documented the failures and proceeded to the second floor. The second floor emergency lighting system was in similar condition. Most fixtures were non-functional. I tested each unit, documented the failures, and continued upward. By the time I reached the fourth floor, I had tested over 60 fixtures. Fewer than 10 had shown any response. The fifth floor was different. As I ascended the stairwell to the fifth floor, the stairwell lights activated. I had not pressed any test buttons. I had not touched any fixtures. The lights simply turned on. I stopped on the landing and looked up. 3 emergency lights illuminated the stairwell, casting a dim yellow glow. I checked the fixtures. The test buttons were not depressed. The units appeared to have activated automatically. I proceeded to the fifth floor corridor. As I stepped into the corridor, the exit signs activated. There were 6 exit signs visible from my position. All 6 illuminated simultaneously. The signs glowed red, displaying the standard exit text and directional arrows. I walked toward the first exit sign. It was mounted above a doorway at the end of the corridor. The arrow pointed left. I followed the arrow. It led to another corridor narrower than the first. Another exit sign was visible ahead. The arrow pointed right. I followed the arrow. It led to a stairwell. Another exit sign was mounted above the stairwell door. The arrow pointed downward. I descended the stairwell. The emergency lights activated as I moved, illuminating each landing. At the bottom of the stairwell, another exit sign was visible. The arrow pointed forward. I followed the arrow. It led to a basement corridor. Another exit sign was ahead. The arrow pointed left. I continued following the signs. They led me through the basement, up another stairwell, through a second-floor corridor, and back to the 5th floor. I was standing in the same corridor where I had started. I documented the route and tested the system again. I walked to a different exit sign and followed its directional arrows. The route was different, but the result was the same. After following a series of arrows, I returned to the 5th floor. I tested this pattern 4 times. Each time, the exit signs led me through the building in a different configuration. Each time, I ended up back on the 5th floor. I expanded my investigation. I manually traced the evacuation routes indicated by the exit signs, mapping each path on the building's floor plan. None of the routes led to an exterior exit. Every route terminated on the 5th floor in the same corridor. I submitted a preliminary report to the county. I described the emergency lighting behavior and recommended immediate corrective action. I noted that the exit signs were directing occupants away from actual exits and creating a potential safety hazard. The county responded the following day. They requested that I return to the site and conduct a comprehensive test of the entire emergency lighting system, including a simulated power failure to verify automatic activation. I returned the following week with additional equipment: a portable power supply, a circuit tester, and a video camera to document the system's behavior. I entered the building and proceeded to the main electrical panel. I connected the portable power supply to the emergency lighting circuit and activated the system. The ground floor emergency lights did not activate. The exit signs remained dark. I proceeded to the 2nd floor. No activation. 3rd floor. No activation. 4th floor. No activation. 5th floor. Full activation. Every emergency light in the 5th floor corridor illuminated simultaneously. Every exit sign glowed red. The directional arrows were visible and clearly marked. I began documenting the system's behavior. I walked through the corridor, filming each exit sign and following the indicated routes. The pattern was identical to my previous visit. The arrows directed me through the building, eventually returning me to the 5th floor. I tested the system's automatic activation. I simulated a power failure by disconnecting the portable power supply. The emergency lights remained on. I reconnected the power supply. The lights remained on. I switched off the circuit breaker. The lights remained on. I could not deactivate the system. I continued documenting. I followed the evacuation routes indicated by the exit signs, recording each turn, each stairwell, each corridor. I mapped the complete network of directional arrows. After 2 hours of testing, I identified a pattern. The exit signs were not directing occupants out of the building. They were directing occupants to specific rooms on the 5th floor. 7 rooms, distributed along the corridor. The same rooms that had been flagged during the environmental inspection for elevated carbon dioxide and temperature readings. I entered one of the rooms. The emergency light above the door remained on. The exit sign inside the room displayed a new message. It no longer read "exit." It read, "Remain." I stepped back into the corridor. The sign reverted to "Exit." I entered a second flagged room. The sign changed again. "Remain." I tested all 7 rooms. Every exit sign in those rooms displayed the same message. "Remain." I documented the findings and exited the building immediately. I submitted an emergency report to the county. I included video documentation, circuit diagrams, and a detailed description of the system's behavior. I concluded that the emergency lighting system was not functioning as designed and posed a significant safety risk. The county forwarded my report to the state fire marshal's office. The fire marshal conducted an independent inspection 3 days later. I accompanied the inspector through the building. We tested the emergency lighting system together. The 5th floor lights activated as before. The exit signs displayed the same routes. The 7 rooms showed the same "Remain" message. The fire marshal documented the findings and issued a formal violation notice. The emergency lighting system was classified as non-compliant and ordered to be permanently deactivated. The county contracted an electrical firm to disconnect the system. The firm completed the work within 1 week. They removed the batteries from every fixture, disconnected the wiring, and verified that the system was inert. I returned to the site 2 weeks later to verify the deactivation. I entered the building and proceeded to the 5th floor. The corridor was dark. I activated my flashlight and walked to the first exit sign. It was illuminated. The arrow pointed left. I checked the fixture. The battery had been removed. The wiring had been disconnected. The unit should not have been operational. But the sign was lit. I tested every exit sign on the 5th floor. All were illuminated. All displayed directional arrows. All led to the same 7 rooms. I entered one of the rooms. The sign changed to "Remain." I documented the findings and submitted a final report. The county did not respond. I have not been asked to return, but I kept the video footage. The emergency lighting system at Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital continues to operate without power, without batteries, without any identifiable energy source. It continues to direct occupants through the building, guiding them along routes that do not lead to exits. It continues to display the message, "Remain," in 7 specific rooms. And it will not deactivate. The fire marshal classified the system as non-compliant. But compliance requires a system that can be controlled. This system has no controls. It operates independently. It has its own purpose, and that purpose is not evacuation. Story 8. Census Adjustment Request. The public health database listed the hospital's active patient population as stable. No admissions, no discharges, no deaths, just a static count of 47 individuals who have been marked as receiving care for 19 years. I am a public health statistician. My work involves collecting, analyzing, and maintaining population health data for state and municipal agencies. I track disease prevalence, healthcare utilization, demographic trends, and institutional capacity. The data informs public health policy, resource allocation, and regulatory oversight. I have been working in this field for 12 years. The work is precise. It requires rigorous data validation, attention to institutional reporting standards, and the ability to identify anomalies that suggest reporting errors or systemic issues. Most discrepancies are benign: clerical errors, delayed reporting, outdated records. Occasionally, I encounter anomalies that require formal investigation. In mid-February, I was conducting a routine audit of statewide institutional healthcare data when I identified an irregularity in the census records for Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital. The facility had been closed since 1992, but the state health database continued to list it as an active care facility with a patient population of 47 individuals. I flagged the record and submitted a correction request to the State Health Department. I assumed the entry was a legacy database error, an outdated record that had not been purged during the facility's closure. The State Health Department responded 3 days later. They confirmed that the record was active and that census updates had been filed annually since the facility's closure. They requested that I conduct a data integrity audit to determine whether the records were erroneous or whether there was ongoing unreported activity at the facility. I reviewed the historical census data for Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital. The facility had maintained an average patient population of 230 individuals during its operational period. The population declined gradually during the late 1980s, reaching 71 patients in November 1992, the month of closure. The final operational census report filed in December 1992 listed 47 patients as discharged to family care. The facility was officially closed on December 31, 1992. Beginning in January 1993, a new census record appeared in the State Health Database. The record listed Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital as active. Patient population, 47. Admissions, 0. Discharges, 0. Deaths, 0. The same census entry had been filed every year for 19 years. The data never changed. The patient population remained stable at 47 individuals. I expanded my investigation. I reviewed the facility's annual reporting submissions. Every required report had been filed on time. Each report listed the same data: patient population 47, no admissions, no discharges, no deaths, occupancy rate 100%, staffing levels adequate. I cross-referenced the facility's licensing records. The license had been renewed annually since closure. The renewal forms listed the same data: active facility, 47 patients under care, compliance with state regulations confirmed. I contacted the State Health Department directly. I requested access to the original census submissions to verify their authenticity. The State Health Department provided digital copies of the submissions. Each report had been filed electronically through the state's health data portal. Each submission included a facility identifier, a reporting period, and a data summary. Each submission had been accepted and processed without flagging. I reviewed the submission metadata. Each report had been filed from an IP address registered to Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital. Each submission had been authenticated using the facility's institutional credentials. Each submission had been filed on the same date each year, January 15th. I contacted the county facilities office. I requested access to the hospital's administrative records to determine who was authorized to submit census reports on behalf of the facility. The county responded that no personnel had been authorized to act on behalf of the facility since closure. The facility's institutional accounts had been deactivated in 1993. I requested access to the State Health Data Portal's audit logs. I wanted to verify the account used to submit the census reports. The State Health Department provided the logs. The account used to submit the reports was listed as Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital, Administrative Services. The account had been created in 1987 and remained active. The last login was recorded on January 15, 2012, 3 weeks prior to my audit. I submitted a formal data integrity violation report to the State Health Department. I recommended that the census records be corrected, the facility's license be revoked, and the institutional account be deactivated. The State Health Department responded 2 weeks later. They acknowledged the violation report and stated that they had attempted to deactivate the institutional account. The deactivation had failed. The account remained active. They requested that I conduct an on-site investigation to determine whether there was physical evidence of ongoing activity at the facility. I arrived at Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital on a cold afternoon in early March. I entered through the main entrance and proceeded to the administrative wing. The administrative offices were on the ground floor near the reception area. I located the main office, a large room with desks, filing cabinets, and a computer workstation. The computer was on. The monitor displayed the State Health Data Portal login screen. The username field was populated, Whitmore Admin. The password field was blank. I approached the workstation. The keyboard was covered in dust. The mouse had not been moved recently. But the computer was running. The hard drive indicator light blinked intermittently. I checked the computer's power supply. It was plugged into a wall outlet. I traced the outlet to the electrical panel. The circuit breaker was in the off position. The computer should not have been operational. I examined the monitor more closely. The login screen displayed a timestamp, March 6th, 2012, 2:37 p.m., the current date and time. I touched the keyboard. The screen refreshed. A new message appeared. Session active. Census update in progress. I pressed a key to interrupt the session. The message did not change. I attempted to power down the computer manually. I pressed the power button. The computer remained on. I disconnected the power cable. The computer remained on. I documented the findings and expanded my search. I checked the filing cabinets in the office. Most were empty. One cabinet contained census records, printed reports dating from 1993 to 2011. I reviewed the reports. Each listed the same data. Patient population 47, no admissions, no discharges, no deaths. At the bottom of each report, a signature line was filled in. The signature was illegible, but the printed name was clear. Dr. L. Kiernan, Chief Statistician. That is my name. I am not a physician. I have never worked at Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital. I have never served as a chief statistician for any healthcare facility. But the census reports listed me as the reporting authority. I photographed the reports and returned to the computer workstation. The screen had changed. It now displayed a completed census submission form. The form listed the reporting period as January to December 2012. Patient population, 47. Admissions 0, discharges 0, deaths 0. At the bottom of the form, the signature line was filled in. Dr. L. Kiernan, Chief Statistician. The handwriting was mine. I left the administrative office and returned to my vehicle. I submitted an emergency report to the State Health Department. I included photographic documentation, computer logs, and a formal request for immediate investigation. The State Health Department responded the following day. They acknowledged the report and stated that they would be initiating a formal audit of the facility's data submission processes. They requested that I remain available for follow-up consultation. I have not been asked to return, but I have continued monitoring the state health database. The census record for Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital remains active. Patient population, 47. The record is updated annually on January 15th. The most recent update was filed 2 months ago. The reporting authority is listed as Dr. L. Kiernan, Chief Statistician. I did not submit the report, but the database says I did, and the patients remain under care. 47 individuals, no admissions, no discharges, no deaths, just a stable population receiving care in a facility that has been closed for 19 years. The census is a public record. It is used to allocate healthcare resources, plan capacity, and monitor institutional compliance. It is supposed to reflect reality. But Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital's census reflects something else. It reflects a population that was never discharged. A population that continues to exist in the data. A population that I am responsible for reporting. Even though I never worked there, Even though I never filed a report, the data says otherwise, and the data is never wrong. Story 9, Decommissioning Authorization. The final closure form required 3 signatures: the county administrator, the state licensing board, and the hospital superintendent. But when I opened the document, my name was already listed in the 4th field. Patient 01, voluntary admission, Ward C. I am a government decommissioning officer. My work involves overseeing the formal closure of public institutions, verifying that all regulatory obligations have been met, ensuring that assets are properly disposed of, and authorizing the final termination of institutional licenses and operating permits. The process is comprehensive. It requires coordination between multiple agencies, review of compliance documentation, and final sign-off from authorized officials. I have been managing decommissioning projects for 15 years. Most proceed without complication. The institution completes its shutdown procedures, submits the required documentation, and receives authorization to close. Occasionally, complications arise: outstanding violations, incomplete transfers, or disputed liabilities. These are resolved through administrative review. The process always concludes. Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital was assigned to me for final decommissioning in late March. The facility had been closed for 19 years, but its operating license had never been formally terminated. The county requested that I complete the decommissioning process so that the property could be fully transferred to new ownership without legal encumbrances. I reviewed the facility's closure documentation. Most of the required reports had been filed in 1992 and 1993. A few were missing: final asset disposition, environmental clearance, and institutional discharge verification. I submitted requests for the missing documents and scheduled a site inspection. I arrived at the hospital on a Tuesday afternoon. The building was quiet. I entered through the main entrance and proceeded to the administrative offices. The decommissioning file was stored in a locked cabinet in the main office. The county had provided me with the key. I unlocked the cabinet and retrieved the file. The file was extensive, over 300 pages of documentation spanning the facility's operational history, closure procedures, and post-closure compliance reports. I began reviewing the documents systematically. Most of the paperwork was complete. Environmental clearance filed, asset disposition filed, personnel termination filed. Patient discharge pending. The patient discharge documentation was incomplete. The final census report listed 47 patients as discharged to family care, but no discharge summaries had been filed, no follow-up contact information was recorded, no receiving facility was listed. I flagged the missing documentation and submitted a formal request to the county. I explained that decommissioning could not be authorized without verified patient discharge records. The county responded within 24 hours. They stated that all patients had been discharged in accordance with state regulations and that no additional documentation existed. I submitted a secondary request to the state licensing board. I requested verification that all patients had been properly discharged and that no ongoing treatment obligations remained. The state licensing board responded 2 weeks later. They confirmed that Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital maintained an active patient population of 47 individuals and that the facility remained subject to ongoing treatment obligations. They stated that decommissioning authorization could not be granted while patients remained under care. I reviewed the census records. The state health database listed the facility as active with a patient population of 47. The database indicated that the population had remained stable since closure. I submitted a formal objection to the state licensing board. I explained that the facility had been closed for 19 years and that no patients were physically present. I requested that the census records be corrected and that the facility's treatment obligations be formally terminated. The State Licensing Board responded with a request for on-site verification. They asked that I conduct a physical inspection of the facility to confirm that no patients were present. I returned to the hospital the following week. I conducted a comprehensive inspection of the entire building. I checked every floor, every corridor, every room. The building was empty, no patients, no staff, no ongoing operations. I documented the findings and submitted a verification report to the State Licensing Board. I confirmed that the facility was unoccupied and that no treatment obligations existed. The State Licensing Board responded 3 days later. They acknowledged the verification report and stated that they would be reviewing the facility's census records for correction. They requested that I proceed with the decommissioning process pending resolution of the census discrepancy. I returned to the administrative office and retrieved the decommissioning authorization form. The form required signatures from 3 parties: the county administrator, the State Licensing Board representative, and the hospital superintendent. I reviewed the signature fields. 2 signatures were already present: the county administrator and the State Licensing Board representative. Both signatures were dated March 28, 2012, 2 days prior. The 3rd signature field, hospital superintendent, was blank. I contacted the county to confirm who was authorized to sign as hospital superintendent. The county informed me that the superintendent position had been vacant since the facility's closure, and that no individual was authorized to sign on behalf of the hospital. I submitted a waiver request to the State Licensing Board, asking that the superintendent's signature requirement be waived due to the facility's closure. The State Licensing Board denied the request. They stated that the superintendent's signature was required for decommissioning authorization and that the facility must designate an acting superintendent to complete the process. I contacted the county again. I explained the situation and requested that they designate an interim superintendent to authorize the decommissioning. The county declined. They stated that they had no authority to appoint hospital personnel and that the facility must resolve the matter internally. I returned to the hospital to review the administrative records. I needed to determine if there were any remaining personnel files that might indicate who could serve as acting superintendent. I searched the filing cabinets in the administrative office. Most were empty. One cabinet contained personnel records, hiring documents, termination notices, and final payroll records. Every employee had been formally terminated in December 1992. At the bottom of the cabinet, I found a folder labeled Acting Superintendent Designation, Emergency Protocols. I opened the folder. It contained a single document, a hospital policy stating that in the event of a vacant superintendent position, the most senior clinical staff member present on site would assume acting superintendent authority for the purpose of completing administrative obligations. The document included a signature field for the designated acting superintendent. The field was filled in. The signature was illegible, but the printed name was clear. Dr. L. Kiernan. That is my name. I set the document down and stepped back. I reviewed the decommissioning authorization form again. The 3rd signature field, hospital superintendent, was no longer blank. A signature had appeared. The signature matched the one in the emergency designation folder. The printed name read, Dr. L. Kiernan, acting superintendent. The date was current, April 3, 2012. I had not signed the document, but the signature was mine. I left the administrative office and returned to my vehicle. I reviewed my notes. I had been inside the building for approximately 90 minutes. I had not touched the decommissioning authorization form. I had not signed any documents. But the form was signed. I returned to the administrative office. The form was still on the desk. The signature was still present. I photographed the form and submitted an emergency report to the state licensing board. I described the unauthorized signature and requested immediate investigation. The state licensing board responded 2 days later. They stated that the decommissioning authorization form had been received and processed. All required signatures were present and verified. Decommissioning authorization had been granted. I reviewed the state database. Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital's operating license had been formally terminated. The facility was no longer listed as active, but the census record remained unchanged. Patient population, 47. I submitted a follow-up inquiry to the state licensing board. I asked how the facility could be decommissioned while patients remained under care. The state licensing board responded that the patients had been transferred to the acting superintendent's care and that ongoing treatment obligations had been assumed by the designated clinical authority. The designated clinical authority was listed as Dr. L. Kiernan. I am not a physician. I have never treated patients. I have never assumed clinical authority. But the state database says otherwise. I contacted the county. I explained the situation and requested that the decommissioning authorization be revoked. The county informed me that the authorization had been finalized and could not be reversed. The facility was now my responsibility. I have not returned to Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital, but I receive monthly reports. The reports are delivered electronically to my work email. They are census updates, treatment summaries, and compliance filings. All are filed under my name. All list me as the acting superintendent. The most recent report arrived yesterday. It listed the patient population as 47. No admissions, no discharges, no deaths. The report included a note. All patients stable. Continued care authorized. Superintendent's signature on file. I did not write the note. I did not authorize continued care, but the hospital says I did. And the hospital is still operating. Not physically, not visibly, but administratively. The paperwork continues. The census updates. The reports are filed, and I am responsible because I signed the form, even though I never touched it. The hospital needed a superintendent, and I was present. That was enough. The decommissioning is complete. The facility is closed, but the patients remain, and they are under my care now, forever. Story 10. Respiratory Therapy Protocol Deviation. The ventilator alarm triggered at 2:43 a.m., a standard low-pressure alert. But when I checked the patient roster, every name listed had a discharge date of 1992, and the machine's digital log showed continuous operation for 7,018 days without interruption. I am a respiratory therapist. My work involves managing mechanical ventilation for patients unable to breathe independently, monitoring respiratory function, adjusting equipment settings to maintain optimal oxygen delivery, and responding to ventilator alarms that indicate physiological or mechanical problems. The work demands technical precision, rapid decision-making, and meticulous documentation. I have been practicing for 14 years. Most shifts are routine, stable patients, predictable parameters, occasional adjustments for comfort or weaning protocols. Emergency situations occur, but they follow recognizable patterns. Equipment malfunctions are rare and always traceable to identifiable causes. In early April, I was contracted by the County Health Services Department to conduct a respiratory equipment audit at Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital. The county had received reports of unusual equipment activity detected during previous inspections, specifically operational ventilators in areas where no power supply existed. My assignment was to locate any remaining respiratory equipment, verify its operational status, and recommend disposal or decommissioning procedures. I arrived at the hospital on a Thursday evening. The county preferred evening inspections to avoid conflicts with ongoing preservation work. I entered through the main entrance and consulted the facility map provided by the county. The respiratory therapy department had been located on the second floor adjacent to the medical wing. I made my way upstairs. The second floor corridor was dark and cold. My flashlight beam revealed scuffed floors, peeling paint, and rows of closed doors. I located the respiratory therapy office at the corridor's midpoint. A small room with a desk, filing cabinets, and equipment storage lockers. The lockers were unlocked. Inside, I found outdated equipment, manual resuscitation bags, oxygen regulators, nebulizer kits, and tracheostomy supplies. Everything was covered in dust. I photographed the contents and documented the equipment serial numbers for disposal records. I proceeded to the equipment storage room adjacent to the office. The room contained larger devices, portable oxygen concentrators, suction machines, and 2 mechanical ventilators. Both ventilators were older models, Puritan Bennett 7 200 units, commonly used in psychiatric and long-term care facilities during the 1980s and early 90s. The machines were mounted on rolling stands, their control panels dark, their breathing circuits disconnected. I photographed both units and recorded their serial numbers. I checked for residual power. Neither machine responded to the power button. The batteries were likely dead after 19 years of disuse. I completed the second floor inspection and prepared to move to the third floor, where additional medical equipment was reportedly stored. As I stepped into the corridor, I heard an alarm. It was faint but unmistakable, a rhythmic beeping pattern I recognized immediately as a low-pressure ventilator alarm. The sound was coming from above. I ascended to the third floor. The alarm grew louder as I approached the medical wing. I followed the sound to a patient room near the end of the corridor. Room 314. The door was closed but unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. A mechanical ventilator stood beside the bed frame. It was operational. The control panel was illuminated. The breathing circuit was connected. The machine's bellows rose and fell rhythmically, delivering breaths at a rate of 17 per minute. The alarm continued beeping, a low-pressure alert indicating insufficient resistance in the breathing circuit. This typically occurs when the circuit is disconnected or when the patient has been extubated. I approached the machine and checked the breathing circuit. The circuit was fully connected, terminating in a standard endotracheal tube adapter. But nothing was attached to the adapter. The tube ended in open air. I silenced the alarm and examined the machine more closely. The control panel displayed current ventilator settings: tidal volume 600 milliliters, respiratory rate 17 breaths per minute, positive end expiratory pressure 5 centimeters of water, fraction of inspired oxygen 40%. These were standard settings for a stable adult patient. The machine's digital display showed additional information. Total runtime 7,018 days. Total breaths delivered 214,427,000. 7,018 days, 19 years, 2 months, and 6 days. Continuous operation since November 1992. I checked the machine's power supply. The power cord was plugged into a wall outlet. I traced the outlet to the circuit breaker panel. The breaker was off. The machine should not have been operational. I examined the ventilator's internal battery compartment. The battery had been removed years ago. The compartment was empty. The machine was running without external power and without an internal battery. I documented the findings and expanded my search. I checked the other patient rooms on the third floor. I found 3 more operational ventilators. All were running. All displayed the same total runtime, 7,018 days. All were delivering breaths to disconnected breathing circuits. I descended to the second floor and checked the medical wing. 2 more operational ventilators, same runtime, same settings, Same disconnected circuits. I returned to the respiratory therapy office and accessed the filing cabinets. I located the equipment logs, maintenance records documenting ventilator assignments, settings, and patient identifiers. The final entries in the log were dated November 1992. 6 ventilators had been in use at the time of the hospital's closure. Each entry listed a patient name, room number, and ventilator serial number. I cross-referenced the serial numbers with the machines I had found. All 6 matched. The patient names were listed beside each entry. I photographed the log and documented the names: Howard Pittman, Margaret Albright, Samuel Roth, Eleanor Voss, Daniel Kress, and Irene Halford. I returned to the 3rd floor and checked the rooms where I had found operational ventilators. The room numbers matched the log. Rooms 314, 321, 326, 333, 338, and 342. I entered room 314, the first room where I had encountered the alarm. I examined the area around the bed frame. The bed was empty, but the sheets were still present, yellowed and brittle with age. I checked the ventilator's settings display. A patient identifier field was visible on the screen. It read, Pittman Howard, 0147. I returned to the respiratory therapy office and reviewed the patient log. Howard Pittman's patient identifier was listed as 0147. I repeated this process for all 6 rooms. Every ventilator displayed a patient identifier matching the log entries. I submitted a preliminary report to the County Health Services Department. I described the operational ventilators, the continuous runtime, and the absence of power sources. I recommended immediate technical consultation. The county dispatched a biomedical equipment technician the following day. We toured the 3rd floor together. The technician examined each ventilator, tested the power supplies, and reviewed the digital logs. He confirmed my findings. The machines were operational despite having no power source. The run times were consistent with continuous operation since hospital closure. The settings were appropriate for stable patients, but no patients were present. The technician attempted to power down the machines. He pressed the power buttons. The machines continued running. He disconnected the breathing circuits. The machines triggered alarms but continued running. He removed the control panel covers and attempted to disable the internal mechanisms. The machines continued running. The technician informed me that he could not shut down the ventilators. He recommended consulting the manufacturer for technical support. I contacted the manufacturer, Puritan Bennett, now part of Medtronic. I provided the equipment serial numbers and described the situation. The manufacturer's technical support team reviewed the information and confirmed that the models in question required external power to operate. They stated that continuous operation for 19 years without power was not possible. I requested that a manufacturer's representative conduct an on-site inspection. The manufacturer declined, stating that the equipment was obsolete and no longer supported. I submitted a detailed report to the county. I included technical documentation, photographic evidence, and the manufacturer's response. I concluded that the ventilators posed no immediate safety risk but represented an unexplained anomaly requiring further investigation. The county responded 2 weeks later. They acknowledged the report and stated that the ventilators would be left in place pending further review. Access to the 3rd floor medical wing was restricted. I was not asked to return, but I kept the equipment logs. I have reviewed them repeatedly. 6 patients, 6 ventilators, 6 rooms, all documented as active on the final day of hospital operation. All listed as discharged to family care in the closure records. But the ventilators were never disconnected. They have been running continuously for 19 years, delivering breaths, 17 per minute, 600 milliliters per breath, 214 million breaths. To no one. The breathing circuits terminate in open air. The endotracheal adapters connect to nothing. The bellows rise and fall, compressing air into empty space. But the machines record every breath. The digital logs show patient identifiers. The settings reflect individual respiratory requirements. The alarms trigger when parameters deviate from safe ranges. The machines believe they are supporting patients, and according to the logs, they are. I contacted the state health department 3 weeks ago. I requested access to the discharge records for the 6 patients listed in the equipment logs. I wanted to verify that they had been safely transferred and were receiving appropriate care. The state health department informed me that discharge records for Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital had been destroyed in accordance with retention policies. No verification was possible. I submitted a secondary request through the State Medical Licensing Board. I asked whether any of the 6 patients had re-entered the healthcare system after discharge. Emergency room visits, clinic appointments, hospital readmissions. The Medical Licensing Board responded that no records existed for any of the 6 individuals after November 1992. They had vanished from the system completely. No medical care, no prescriptions, no follow-up appointments, no death certificates. They simply ceased to exist in the records, but the ventilators continue running. I returned to Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital 2 nights ago. I did not inform the county. I entered through an unsecured side entrance and made my way to the 3rd floor. The ventilators were still operational. The alarms were silent. The breathing circuits remained connected to nothing. I stood in room 314 and watched the ventilator deliver breaths. The bellows compressed. The pressure gauge fluctuated. The digital display showed stable parameters. I reached out and placed my hand in front of the endotracheal adapter, where a patient's airway would have been. I felt air, warm air, not the cool, dry air produced by mechanical compression, warm, humid air. The air exhaled by living lungs. I stepped back. The ventilator continued running. The bellows continued cycling. The parameters remained stable. I checked the other 5 rooms. The same phenomenon. Warm, humid air expelled from breathing circuits connected to nothing. I am a respiratory therapist. I have managed mechanical ventilation for 14 years. I understand airflow dynamics, humidity exchange, and temperature gradients. I know the difference between machine-generated air and biological respiration. The ventilators at Whitmore Psychiatric Hospital are not just delivering breaths, they are receiving them. The machines are connected to something, not physically but functionally. They are supporting respiratory function for patients who are no longer present, for patients who were discharged 19 years ago, for patients who vanished from every database, every record, every traceable system. But the machines remember, and the machines continue their work, 17 breaths per minute, 600 milliliters per breath, continuous operation for 7,018 days. The protocol has not changed. The patients are still listed, and the ventilators will not stop. Because somewhere, in a space that exists in documentation but not in physical reality, those patients are still breathing, and the machines are still keeping them alive. I have submitted no further reports. I have filed no additional documentation, because I know what the response will be. The machines will be classified as operational anomalies. Access will remain restricted. The equipment will be left in place, and the ventilators will continue running, because the hospital still has patients, not in beds, not in rooms, but in the machines, in the logs, in the endless cycle of breaths delivered and received, and I cannot disconnect them. Because I do not know what would happen if the machines stopped. I do not know if the breathing would stop, or if something else would begin, so the ventilators remain operational, and the patients remain on respiratory support, Forever documented, forever monitored, forever breathing, in a hospital that closed 19 years ago.